We are in a time, Be'ezras Hashem, tomorrow night. This time would be Rosh Chodesh, so it's Erev Rosh Chodesh, Av, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, and we have this double portion of Parshiyos, Parshas Matos and Parshas Masei, two Parshiyos. As I mentioned in the last few shiurim, that we see that the Parshios are very connected, has a shayches, is connected, has a connection with a time in the year that we are in, which is now in the 3 weeks, and we're entering the 9 days, of Avelus, of the morning of the Beis Hamikdash, davening and hoping that the Binyan Bayis Shlishi should be built very soon. The beginning of this week's Parsha starts with a Parsha of Nidorim, where the Torah teaches us that we could do a vow, we could make a vow, we could say with our mouth that we want to put a certain Isser, we want to make something that should be forbidden for ourselves. And the Torah goes in with all the halachas, with a young girl, if she is married, if she is an arusa, if she only had kedushin, if she's already fully in her husband's house. The Torah gets into all these different halachas. The Morav Shemesh, which I mentioned already quite a few times by our shir, the Zayd of the Petzetzner Rebbe, Eish Kodesh, he writes, he says like this. He says, the Torah, this week, since we are now in the 3 weeks of mourning of Avelos, the Torah talks about the power of our speech, which we had in the previous Parshas also, but in this Parsha we see that a person could change the actual whole being of something that was mutter, that was you were able to do or you were able to eat, suddenly becomes forbidden for the person, all because the person says with his mouth, nothing else besides a person saying, I am putting this, I'm answering this, I'm making a neder, I'm making a vow that this certain thing should be usher for me. The power, says the Morav Shemesh, that the Torah teaches us in this week's Parsha, what our mouth has, which changes the whole being of the actual thing that was before it becomes forbidden, to teach us what a mouth of a person is. So when we are now in the 3 weeks, in order to build the Beis Hamikdash, by using our mouth, giving chizuk to each other, strengthening each other, we have the koyach, we have the strength to build the third Beis Hamikdash. So the Torah, says the Morav Shemesh, wants to teach us the importance and the severeness of our speech. We all know that in the entire Torah, in the Chamisha Chumsha Torah, in Tanakh as well, the Torah does not mention anyone's yahrzeit. The only yahrzeit that's mentioned is Aharon HaKohen, which is mentioned in this week's Parsha and Parshas Masei. And the Torah tells us Aharon HaKohen was nifter on Rosh Chodesh Av, which is tomorrow night. So Aharon HaKohen's yahrzeit is tomorrow night. And this is actually the only yahrzeit that the Torah specifically says it openly when the yahrzeit is. So the Sfas Emes explains why is it that Aharon HaKohen's yahrzeit is the only yahrzeit mentioned. And he says like this. He says, by the Mei Meriva, by the story that we all know, when Moshe Rabbeinu should have spoken to the stone, to the rock, instead he hit the rock and the water came out. Aharon HaKohen was standing there, and he was actually part of the shlichus, Hashem's shlichus. Hashem sent Moshe and Aharon to do this mission, but obviously Moshe was, so to say, in the driver's seat, and Aharon HaKohen was a bystander. But since Aharon HaKohen did not step up and remind Moshe and stop Moshe Rabbeinu from doing what he did, therefore Aharon HaKohen, he got this oynish that he was not zoichet to go into Eretz Yisrael. Says this Sfas Emes, Moshe, where was Moshe Rabbeinu buried? Moshe Rabbeinu was buried mul Beis Pa'ar, opposite the Beis Pa'ar, opposite the Avodah Zarah of Pa'ar, which was a very severe tumah. And Moshe Rabbeinu's being buried over there, says the Medrash, puts this tumah down, meaning that this tumah shouldn't be able to have the full potential of Chas v'Shalom influence Klal Yisrael to do Averis. So by Moshe Rabbeinu, so this tumah of Pa'ar still exists, says this Sfas Emes. It's a certain impureness that's in the world which stems from this Avodah Zarah Pa'ar. And Moshe Rabbeinu, who's being buried opposite the Pa'ar, puts this tumah down, which means that the tumah doesn't have the full koyach, the full strength that it could have had. Says this Sfas Emes, Aharon HaKohen, he was actually buried on Har HaHar. So we don't find any specific thing that Aharon HaKohen is battling, so to say. But the Sfas Emes says, Aaron is also doing something which is helping us in Golus. He says, Aharon HaKohen, we know that Moshe Rabbeinu passed away Zayin Adar because it was the day that he was born. And usually HaKadosh Baruch Hu Hashem is Memala, he fills the years of tzaddikim that they pass away. Big tzaddikim pass away in the day that they were born. Moshe Rabbeinu, Zayin Adar, that was the day he was born. Says the Sfas Emes, Aharon HaKohen should have also been nifter in the day that he was born. We don't know when he was born, says the Sfas Emes. But Sfas Emes says, Aleph Av, Rish Chodesh Av is not the day that he was born. Why was he nifter Aleph Av? Says the Heilige Sfas Emes, because Aharon was the first Kohen Gadol. He was the first one doing the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. He brought in a Kedusha, which is l'doyre doyres into his children and grandchildren, that they have this special uniqueness of being Kahanim. And this Kedusha, he says, this Sfas Emes, keeps us going in Golus by having these Kahanim, which they go back, which they basically trace back to Aharon HaKohen. The Kedusha that Aharon put in to his children and grandchildren go down from one generation to another, and it gives us strength to keep on going in Golus. And not only this, says the Sfas Emes, it also gives us strength to be able to daven for the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. And Aharon HaKohen, who was the Oyev Shalom, Veroidev Shalom, which is the opposite of what the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, his koyach of Ahavas Chinam, of Oyevas Habriyas, brings the Geula and will, Yetz Hashem, bring the full redemption. So therefore, says the Sfas Emes, Aharon HaKohen was Dafke Nifter Rish Chodesh Av, because it's the 9 days, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu implemented, put into the Bria, into the creation, this koyach of Aharon, by him passing away on Rish Chodesh Av, that his koyach that he had, which is the Kohen Gadol koyach, which he gave over to his children and grandchildren, should be able to go and continue and should bring us through this terrible Golus, and we should be able to have the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt. So again, Sfas Emes, the way he sees this, he sees it has to do with the 3 weeks, with the 9 days, and it's the only yahrzeit that the Torah feels important to mention, which should give us chizuk and strength, says the Sfas Emes, that should strengthen our emunah, that we see that the Kahanim are still around. There's still the grandchildren, the descendants of Aharon HaKohen are still here. It should give us the chizuk and strength of the emunah of Binyan B'Aya Shlishi B'Mheira B'Yameinu. Moving a little bit further in this week's Parsha, we have the Milchama, the war that Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to hold war, to keep war with the Midyanim, with the Midianites, and there's a mitzvah to wipe them out after what they have done for the Klal Yisrael, for the Bnei Yisrael, with getting Klal Yisrael to Rachmana Litzlan do the Znus, the Gili Arayis. Famous Rashi, which we all know, Rashi says that Moshe Rabbeinu, he was only able to pass away, he was only able to be nifter after the revenge, after taking the revenge of the Midyanim. Now, why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu's Petira, Moshe Rabbeinu's passing away was so important that it had to do, his passing away was basically tolu, meaning it was dependent on this Mulchama. So the way the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh sees it is, he sees it like this. He says, by the story of Zimri, when Zimri did the Znus with Cosby, at the end of the day, Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a hisrashlus, meaning Moshe wasn't so enthusiastic. He didn't do what he needed to do. He forgot the halacha, but he wasn't so fired up right away to kill Zimri, which Pinchas did. Moshe Rabbeinu, on his level, this was a pegam. It was a blemish in his neshama. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted, says the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, that Nishmas Moshe, that the neshama of Moshe should be able to be elevated again to the level that he was before the story of Zimri. And by taking revenge in the Midyanim, by sending the troops and taking revenge of the Midyanim, this was a tikkun, what Moshe Rabbeinu was lacking for not doing what Pinchas did when he killed Zimri. But there's a Moiridige Chadusha Arim, which says the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu was only nifter after, he says he doesn't address this thing that I just spoke about. Why was it so important, the Mulchama, which I told you from the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh? But he addresses a very interesting thing. He says, we see in Chazal, in Zoyar, a concept which is called Zeh Le'uma Zeh Osalikim. Meaning, if you see Tumah, if you see the power of Tumah, you should know that the same koyach, the same strength a person could have in Kedusha. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not send nisyonis, does not send challenges, which a person doesn't have the equal free will of either choosing the mitzvah, chas v'shalom, the aveira. Zeh le'uma zeh asa alekim. That's a pasuk in Mishlei. This is something which Hashem, this is something that we all have in all generations. So says the Chidush Arim, Bilam was still alive. Bilam was the le'um, was the opposite, was the other side. He was the Tzad Tumah, which is the battle against Moshe. Moshe was the Kedusha and Bilam was the Tumah. In order for Bilam to be able, as long as Bilam was still alive, Moshe Rabbeinu was alive as well. By the Milchemes Midyan, that's when Bilam was killed. Once Bilam is killed, so the Le'uma Zeh, the Bilam, the Klippa, the Tumah of Bilam doesn't exist anymore. That's when Moshe Rabbeinu could pass on and go into Olam Haba. So it's an amazing concept, which basically Chidush Arim sets that we have always this. It has to be the balance. Without the balance, it doesn't work. And over here, in order to have the balance, Moshe Rabbeinu was the one balancing out the Tumah from Bilam. Right over here, right by this Milchama, we see two very interesting psukim. It says, "Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe leimoy." Hashem speaks to Moshe, and Hashem tells Moshe, "Nikoim nikmas b'nei Yisrael me'es Midyanim." I want you to take the revenge from the Midianites, and afterwards you'll pass on to Osav Amecha. You'll be nifter. When Moshe Rabbeinu goes and he gives over the message to the Bnei Yisrael, he says it differently. Vaydaber Moshe Elohim, Moshe speaks to the people, Hey, choltzu meitchem, you should basically get ready. And then it says, Lo says to give nikmas Hashem, the revenge of Hashem b'midyan. So again, when Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to speak to the Bnei Yisrael, it says, nikmas Bnei Yisrael. I want the Yidden to take revenge for the Bnei Yisrael. And when Moshe gives over the message to the Bnei Yisrael, he says, Bnei Yisrael, it's time to take revenge for Hashem. It's time to go in war to take the revenge for Hashem. So to stick up for Hashem. Why is it that Hashem says Bnei Yisrael and Moshe says Hashem? There were two parts. Last week I spoke about it. There were two parts that took place when the Bnei Yisrael were unfortunately doing immorality. One thing happened was there was 24,000 Yidden that unfortunately died. In the same time, the Yidden unfortunately did Avedis. They were over the very serious Avedis of Avodah Zarah and Gilui Arayos. So there was a part which is very painful, so to say, kavyochel to Hashem, because Yidden did Avedis. In the same time, there was something which was very painful for Klal Yisrael, that 24,000 Yidden died. So here it says Hashem like this: I want the Bnei Yisrael to take revenge from the Midyanim because I love the Bnei Yisrael, and unfortunately there were 24,000 Yidden that were killed. I want them to take revenge because of the lack of 24,000 Yidden that were unfortunately killed. So Kavyochel Hashem, he, so to say, felt the pain of the Bnei Yisrael, that 24,000 Yidden were killed. Moshe Rabbeinu in the same time said, Bnei Yisrael, you should go in war. Why? Because unfortunately the Midyanim got the Bnei Yisrael to do Avedis, which pained Hashem. I want you to keep in mind that you're taking revenge for the pain that was caused to Hashem. So Hashem was focused on the pain of Klal Yisrael, and we were focused on the pain of Hashem, which is ani l'doidi v'doidi li. Everyone focused on the other, which is obviously something which, if we take into everyday life, and when we say to ourselves, what could we do for our spouses? What could we do for another Yid? We think about someone else. Everyone thinks about someone else. That obviously that is basically the lesson, one of the lessons that we learn from this Milchemes Midyan. By this Milchama, the Balaturim asks a very interesting kasha. By this war, it says, Moshe tells the Bnei Yisrael, I want you to take from each shevet, from each tribe, 1,000 people, and they should be the soldiers. They should be the soldiers going in war with Midyan, which obviously adds up to 12,000. Says the Balaturim, why is it that by this war, not even once the Torah mentions a word of a Nasi? He says all the time, when the Torah talks about all the tribe, it says, Shevet Reuven, and then the Torah says the name of the Nasi. Why doesn't the Torah mention over here, not even one mentioning of the Nasi, of any Nasi, not even one Nasi? It just says, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Bnei Yisrael, 1,000 people of each Shevet should go, for each tribe should go and hold war with the Midyanim. It doesn't mention a word of any Nasi. So listen, Rabbi Bayer, the Balaturim says, you know why there is no Nasi mentioned? Because there was one Nasi that unfortunately was killed because he did an Aveira, and that's Zimri. If the Torah would have mentioned the Nesiim, says the Balaturim, the Torah would have, unfortunately, the Torah would have had to not mention Zimri since he wasn't alive anymore. And it would have been embarrassing for the tribe of Shimon that every Shevet has a Nasi and they don't have a Nasi. Why? Because he did an Aveira. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not mention any Nasi. Why? Not to embarrass Shevet Shimon. What do we learn from this, says the Balaturim? The importance of being sensitive to one another. that the Torah does not mention any Nasi when it comes to the Milchama of Midian, because there's one Nasi that would have been skipped, which is Zimri, and people would have said, why? Because he was killed. And it would have been an embarrassing thing for Shevet Levi, for Shevet Shimon. The importance of being sensitive to one another. And obviously now that we are in the time almost entering the 9 days, what an important lesson the Torah teaches us this week, how we need to be sensitive and think of another person's feeling. Moving a little bit more forward, more in the Parsha, the Torah tells us after the war of Midian, this is capital second. Where's the pasuk? The Torah teaches us about the halacha of kashering vessels. The Torah says that after the Bnei Yisrael took all the vessels from Midian, Elazar taught them the halachas of hagala, of kashering vessels. If you have a vessel that's treif, if you have a keli, a vessel that's treif, there are ways how you could make it, how you could take away the treifness and it should become kosher again. And the Torah says anything and everything that was used with fire, you got to put into fire. If it was used not in fire, then you don't have to put it in fire. But the way the Torah expresses itself, the Torah says, Zois chukas haTorah, this is the teaching of the Torah. And then the Torah goes on and says, if it was used with fire, then you have to put it into fire, that it should become kosher. If it was not used with fire, you don't have to put it into fire. Ask Reb Moshe Feinstein, why is it that the Torah says Zois chukas haTorah when it comes to the Parsha of kashering vessels? Zois chukas hatahara, like we had it in Parshas Chukas. Why? It doesn't say this, but that was the kasha. Why does the Torah mention Zois chukas haTorah in this Parsha? So Reb Moshe finds, the way he sees is, he says something so interesting. He says like this. He says, so many times we have this Yetzer Hara coming to us and basically putting into our brain, we're not doing the right things anyhow. We're making so many mistakes. How could we do tshuva? How could we, correct our ways of behavior? Says the Reb Moshe Feinstein, the Torah tells us, Zois chukas haTorah. What I'm teaching you now, which is the halacha of changing a vessel from being impure to become pure through doing different things of hagala, of making it pure, Zois chukas haTorah. This is really a choik. This is a rule in the entire Torah. Anything and everything, when we make a mistake, we can correct it. Just like Elazar teaches Klal Yisrael, when we have vessels that are, so to say, not correct, because it's treif, and you could correct it. Zois chukas haTorah. This is the chukah, this is the rule in the entire Torah. We could always correct, and we could always fix anything and everything that we did. Now the Torah over here teaches us that anything that was put in fire, the way to kasher it is through fire. The Be'er Mayim Chaim, he was the Chernovitzer Rebbe. He wrote a sefer called Sedura Shel Shabbos. So he writes in his sefer Sedura Shel Shabbos, he writes like this. He says, unfortunately, he says, when we do Averis and we chas v'shalom, we become heated, we become chas v'shalom, we get in kas, we get angry. When we do chas v'shalom things that we get heated, it's Rahman al-Litzlan, it heats up the Eshal Gehenim. It makes Rahman al-Litzlan, it doesn't bring good into the world. He says the way to be mitaken chas v'shalom, how to correct these things, is through a geschmacke davening, a geschmacke learning, a geschmacke do mitzvahs. When we do a mitzvah with a geschmack, with a bren, with a warmth, that takes away the pain or the einish, the punishment. If chas v'sholom, a person should have been punished chas v'sholom because of doing an aveira with a chas v'sholom, with a bren, with like doing it with all strength, doing a mitzvah, learning Torah and davening with a bren, with a geschmack, that takes away that chas v'sholom, that sar, or whatever pain a person could have had. There's an amazing story. I once shared this story, but it's an amazing story that happened during World War II. And this story happened to the Brisker Rav. So the Brisker Rav, unfortunately, by Second World War, he lost his wife and he lost two of his daughters and a few of his sons. As we know, Reb David and other sons stayed alive, and also two daughters that were Baruch Hashem stayed alive. One daughter became the Rebbetzin. Her husband's name was Shiv, and she was a very chashuv Rebbetzin later on. When her mother passed away, I think I shared the story already. When her mother passed away during the war, she was 7 years old. She was heartbroken, mamish heartbroken, and obviously she was very, thinking about her mother all the time. She had one bracelet from her mommy, which was actually torn. It wasn't even whole, it was torn. But she always, whenever she had this yearning towards her mother, she would hold on to this bracelet and it would calm her. At some point during the war, the Askanim, the people who were involved, were able to get visas for the Brisker Rav and his children to make aliyah, to go with a ship to Eretz Yisrael. And they were zoicha to go to Eretz Yisrael, obviously. Now the ship anchored 10 minutes after Shkia by the port. So going off the ship to land is not a problem. But to bring the stuff with them, that's a problem, because it's taking from one domain to another domain. So the Brisker Rav knew that his daughter was very attached to the bracelet that she had from her mother. So she was 7 years old, obviously. Some people would have said it's not a problem, she's young. But this Rebbetzin, her name was Yechevet, she says, my father came over to me, and my father took me on his lap and he hugged me and he said, Yechevet, I know that you really like this bracelet. It's so dear to you. But Yechevet Hayere, Shabbos Kodesh that Hashem gave us is a present, a matana, a present, which is so dear to us. So I totally understand that you have this bracelet from your mommy and you're so connected to it, and you can't let go. But we have something that's even more precious, which is the Shabbos Kodesh. Would you let go from this bracelet in order to be able to hold on to Shabbos Kodesh? And she said, it made such an impression on me what my father spoke to me, that I was able to overcome this clinging to this bracelet, and I gave it up, and I was able to move on, to go off the boat. So she said, my tati taught me such an amazing lesson for life. If you want to inspire a person, you want to inspire your child, you want to inspire a person in shul, or a person, a good friend of yours, the way to do it is to awaken in this person the love that Hashem has towards us, the beauty that we have the Torah mitzvahs, to stress on the beauty and the love that Hashem has towards us, rather than the chas v'sholem putting a person down. So the idea that the Be'er Mayim Chaim shares with us is similar to what this story is, which is basically that when we want to be inspired, we want to be able to have this kedusha de gefil, We have to go with the same koyach that we have if we do chas v'shalom something that's not good, and we're all fired up. We have to do the good things also in a fiery way. Now the Torah, by beginning of Parshas Masei, the Torah talks about the Membeis Masois, the 42 different travelings that the Bnei Yisrael traveled in the Midbar. One of the things that the Baal Shem Tov teaches us, Baal Shem Tov says that every person during his lifetime goes through Membeis Masois. We all have to go through Membeis Masois. We go through travelings. Sometimes it doesn't, says the Baal Shem Tov, it doesn't always have to be physical traveling. It doesn't have to be that we travel, we move from one place to another. It could be emotional travel. We have things that we go through in our lives that come our way, and we have to deal with it. It's part of the Masoy, it's part of the travelings that we go through during our lifetime. So the Morinayim, the Heilige Morinayim, he says, we know, and this is a very famous Yisoid, a very fundamental thing. So many times we go places, we have plans to go somewhere, and at the end we end up somewhere else. Says the Morinayim, every place that we are, there are sparks of kedusha, of sparks netzoitzes, it's called, of kedusha, which each and every individual has his sparks that he has to elevate, or she has to elevate during the person's lifetime. And it can't be that one person could elevate the other persons. It has to be that person to elevate the sparks that are connected to his neshama. Says the Morinayim, therefore, when we go places, there's a reason why we have to be there. If sometimes we don't understand the reason, it could be for this reason, because there are sparks, different netzoitzes that have to be elevated, and it only has a shaykhus, it has a connection to us and every person individually. And the Aharon HaKohen also says similarly to this. He says if we look into the Parsha, we see there were some places that the Bnei Yisrael rested, and they were there for a year. There were places that the Bnei Yisrael rested for a month. And there were sometimes places that they rested only for a week or for a day. Why is it, asked the Aharon HaKohen? Says the Aharon HaKohen exactly what we're saying from the Morinayim. He says, because in each and every place in the Midbar, in the desert, during the time when the Bnei Yisrael were in the desert, they had to elevate its sparks. And each place that they were, it was depending how much nitzoitzes they had to elevate, and that's how long they had to spend in that place. There were a lot, so they had to be for a longer time. Less, then they had to be lesser a time. So it all had to do with this idea of the nitzoitzes. And therefore, says the Baal Shem Tov, every person has his journey in life, which a person needs to go through in order to be able to accomplish and to fulfill the mission that a person has in his life. Now, moving a little bit further in the Parsha, in Parshas Masei, the Torah teaches us the halachas of Orei Miklot, which is the cities that if a person killed chas v'sholem b'shoigig, not willingly, that person ran into that place, into that settlement, and that's where the person stayed until the Kohen Gadol was nifter, the Kohen Gadol passed away, and only then that person was able to leave the place that he was because of what he did, that he killed someone b'shoigig. In this parsha, the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, he separated 3 cities on the other side of the Yarden before entering Eretz Yisrael, because he wanted a chaparayin, he wanted to do any mitzvah that he was able to do, he wanted a chaparayin. But, says Rashi, these 3 Orei Miklots had no power, meaning it wasn't yet active It wasn't, nothing was going on until later on when they also had the three Arei Miklats in Eretz Yisrael. Why is it, asked the Shachal HaTorah, why is it that the three Arei Miklats outside Eretz Yisrael didn't have any strength, didn't operate, so to say, yet, until they had the three in Eretz Yisrael? So says the Shachal HaTorah, also a very interesting thought. He says like this. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything that we go through is with a cheshbon. A person shouldn't, chas v'sholem, start thinking, why is Hashem doing this to me? No, if this is happening to the person, if this is happening to whoever it is, Hashem exactly measures exactly how much the person should chas v'sholem go through suffering or something, and how much the person doesn't deserve. Everything is very, very on a perfect scale. So says the Shachal HaTorah, he says, since there was no time, there was no destined time, meaning there was no time known, when will everything be settled? In other words, let me explain. The three Arei Miklat in Eretz Yisrael were only in service, meaning it started being in service that people were running there and people were saving their lives only after Bnei Yisrael fully settled into Eretz Yisrael. Once the Bnei Yisrael were fully settled in Eretz Yisrael, that's when it started operating. But there was no time frame how long this will take. It actually took 14 years. But when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, they didn't know how long it will take. And since this person who would have run into the Arei Miklot on the other side of the Yarden, he wouldn't know when he will be left out, even though the Kohen Gadol is also not a time frame. But a person knows when the Kohen Gadol passes away, then he'll be released. He doesn't know when exactly, but he knows it's dependent on something. But over here, he didn't know, because no one knew when this is going to be, when Eretz Yisrael would be settled. Hashem doesn't put a person in a situation, says the Shachal HaTorah, when there is no measurement exactly how much. But let me finish this year with a very powerful, fascinating word, which is mentioned. It's the Meshech Chochmah says this word. It's mentioned also in other svarim, but it's amazing, an amazing yisoid. So we know that the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, the two tribes, Gad and Reuven, they begged Moshe Rabbeinu, they want to have a portion outside Eretz Yisrael, and they want to stay outside Eretz Yisrael and settle over there, which is Be'ever HaYarden, on the other side of the Yarden, which is not in Eretz Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu at first was very nervous that Chas v'Sholem, they're going to influence again Klal Yisrael, that the Bnei Yisrael shouldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. And at the end, obviously, they promised Moshe they'll go in war, and they would actually be the first one to battle, to fight the war, which they did. Now, the famous question, why is it that the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven wanted to stay in Ever HaYarden? Why didn't they want to go into Eretz Yisrael? Now, obviously, the simplistic reason, which it says in the Pasuk, is because they had a lot of soyin uvaka, they had a lot of cattle, and they wanted the cattle, and there was a lot of good things for the cattle to eat, to be able to graze. But still, why is it? Says the Meshech Chochmah, he says like this. Actually, it's not the Meshech Chochmah, I'm sorry, it's the Shachal HaTorah also. Shachal HaTorah says like this, listen, amazing word. He says like this. He says, when we learned in previous Parshios, we learned how the Bnei Yisrael were set up with the Golem. They had each three tribes had a space where the section was, where they were resting in the Midbar. Says the Shachal HaTorah, you know which three tribes were together? Gad, Reuven, and Shimon were together. They were in the Midbar, they were all together. Says the Shachal HaTorah, when Gad and Reuven saw what happened to Shevet Shimon. That Shevet Shimon was unfortunately very involved in this, in the Zimri and Cosby story, as Rashi says that the 24,000 people that died were all from Shevet Shimon. They were so involved in this, they felt that it would be a not good influence. They would be chas v'sholem oile rasha v'oile shchenoi. Sometimes when we have a shochin, a neighbor that's not good, we have influences that influence us, and Itaka does harm for us. So they rather wanted to stay the other side of the Yarden, not going into Eretz Yisrael, not to be close, because they were nervous that their chelik, their portion in Eretz Yisrael, would be close to Shimon, and they did not want to be close to Shimon, knowing what happened to Shimon, that they were unfortunately they lost it, so to say. So just to finalize the shir, we are now, tomorrow night, we're entering the month of Av, Chodesh Av, the Yortzeit of Aharon HaKohen, which we said in the beginning of the shir. Aharon HaKohen, he is the one who gives us the koyach and the strength to hold in Golus. We see that Shevet Kahuna, that the Kahanim are still existing, and Aharon HaKohen is the Oyev Shalom Veroidev Shalom. That's why he passed away, Rosh Chodesh Av, says the Sfas Emes. So the Eibishter zal helfen, we should be Zoiche, that the month of Av should be a month of bracha and atzlacha, and we should be zoiche, like the Kedushas Levi says, that the 9 days should turn into a Yom Tiv, a 9-day Yom Tiv, and we should be zoiche to bias Mashiach Tzidkenu b'mheira b'yomeinu. Amen.